They thought they were just renovating a kitchen, knocking down plaster, tearing up brick. Routine work on an old Vermont farmhouse. But hidden in the walls was something no blueprint had ever recorded. A sealed metal box, heavy, etched with strange symbols and impossible to open. Inside weren't jewels or gold, but journals detailing secrets powerful men wanted to erase forever. Now the family faces a choice: bury the truth again or risk everything by exposing it. Why was it hidden for nearly a century? And what happens when knowledge weighs more than treasure? This is the story of a discovery never meant to be found. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The farmhouse had stood at the edge of the Vermont hills for longer than anyone in the family could clearly trace. Its white clapboard siding had been painted over so many times that no one could remember the original shade, and the porch boards grown underfoot in a way that had become part of its character rather than a flaw to be fixed. For decades, the house had sheltered children, weathered storms, and absorbed the quiet routines of daily life. It was not the sort of place that invited mystery. Every board and nail seemed plain, every corner familiar. When the decision was finally made to renovate the kitchen, it was not with excitement, but with the practicality of replacing rotting floor joists and wiring that belonged in a museum more than a modern home. The father had checked with the county archives before work began, retrieving a faded set of blueprints stamped in the 1940s when the last major renovations had taken place. The layout was straightforward: a rectangular kitchen connected to the dining room, a pantry tucked into one corner, a modest window over the sink that faced the maple trees out back. Nothing about the design hinted at complications. The walls had been measured, the beams marked, and the plan seemed predictable. He told his wife they would be done in weeks. She smiled skeptically, knowing that old houses rarely surrender their secrets so easily. The first days passed in the rhythm of demolition. Cabinets came down, brittle plaster cracked and fell in chunks, and a fine dust settled over everything like a reminder that the house had been holding on to its age quietly. Beneath the surface, they found exactly what the blueprints promised: studs in the right places, beams aligned with the plans, wiring snaked predictably across joists. Each discovery reassured them that the renovation would go smoothly. The children, half interested, wandered in and out, more fascinated by the chaos and the promise of a future kitchen. It was on the fourth afternoon, with the late autumn light stretching long across the bare subfloor, that the unexpected appeared. A wall between the kitchen and the pantry had been partly dismantled, exposing brickwork that looked older than the rest of the structure. The father paused, wiping plaster dust from his face, and noticed something unusual. The bricks did not run evenly from one side to the other. Instead, a faint vertical seam broke the pattern, a line so subtle it might have gone unnoticed if not for the angle of the light. He leaned closer. The seam was narrow but distinct. The bricks on one side were slightly darker, their mortar finer, as if laid at a different time than the rest. He tapped gently with the handle of his hammer. The sound that came back was not hollow exactly, but neither was it the solid, consistent thud of ordinary masonry. It was uneven, reluctant, carrying a tone that suggested something behind the wall. The mother, watching from the doorway, asked what was wrong. He gestured to the seam and explained that the foundation should have been continuous. The blueprints showed no divisions, no cavities. According to every document they had, this part of the wall was meant to be solid. She frowned, uneasy, and suggested it was probably just sloppy work from a past repair. Yet her voice carried little conviction. As the evening darkened outside, the discovery lingered in the room with them. The children returned from school and were drawn immediately to the gap in the brickwork, running their fingers over the faint line, as if it were a secret meant only for them. They asked what might be inside, voices bright with speculation. Treasure, old letters, maybe just forgotten tools. The father tried to laugh it off, though he found himself staring at the seam longer than he meant to. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, he unrolled the blueprints again across the dining room table. His hand smoothed the fragile paper, tracing the lines he had memorized. The kitchen's outer wall was drawn clearly, measured and signed by an architect long dead. No alcoves, no compartments. The pantry wall was plain. He compared the drawings to photographs he had taken during demolition. The measurements did not align perfectly. There was space, narrow, hidden, where nothing should have been. The house creaked in the wind, as if aware of his discovery. He thought about how many families had lived here, how many renovations had been made before his, and whether anyone had ever noticed what he now could not ignore. His wife joined him at the table, studying the plans with quiet unease. She reminded him that some things were hidden for reasons, and not all discoveries brought relief. He nodded but said nothing, his eyes fixed on the faint seam in the brick captured by his photograph. By morning, the sense of ordinariness that had always defined the farmhouse felt disturbed. The kitchen no longer seemed like just a room in need of new cabinets and paint. The seam in the foundation turned every task into prelude. As plaster dust settled again on the floorboards, the family worked with the knowledge that their house had been keeping something from them. And though none of them would admit it aloud, they all knew the truth. What they had found was not a mistake, not sloppy construction, but a deliberate concealment. Something was waiting behind the wall. The sound of hammer strikes echoed dully through the stripped-down kitchen, plaster dust drifting through shafts of afternoon light. The father had been working carefully, tracing the faint seam in the brickwork he had noticed the evening before. At first, he thought it might simply be a repair line, where newer brick had been patched into older foundation, but the more material he removed, the clearer the discrepancy became. The mortar along that seemed crumbled differently than the rest, brittle in places, too smooth in others. Something about it resisted the uniform story the house had told so far. He worked steadily, prying loose one brick, then another, until the pattern of construction revealed itself. The wall had been built with intention, not carelessness, and at its center was something hidden. As the opening widened, the cavity revealed itself in uneven darkness. It was not large, perhaps 3 feet wide, no more than 2 feet deep, but it had been constructed deliberately. The father paused, sweat gathering beneath the collar of his work shirt despite the chill in the November air. He reached in with his flashlight, the beam cutting across the rough interior. What it illuminated made him still. Resting inside, wedged against the inner stone, was a box. It did not belong to the era of the house, at least not in any conventional sense. The object was rectangular, but its edges were softened by time, its surfaces dulled to a dark gray patina. It seemed metallic, though not like iron or steel he was accustomed to handling. He touched it with tentative fingers, expecting the coarse rust of old tools. Instead, the surface was unnaturally smooth, even under layers of tarnish, and colder than the surrounding stone. He drew his hand back instinctively, unsettled by the chill that lingered on his fingertips. His wife, who had been sweeping debris from the floor behind him, noticed a shift in his expression. She set the broom aside and came closer, kneeling at the edge of the opening. Together they studied the box, silent, as if raising their voices might disturb something best left asleep. After a long pause, she asked what it was made of. He admitted he didn't know. It looked like metal, but he couldn't place the kind. Lead was possible, though it lacked the softness. Bronze or brass. Perhaps, though it bore none of familiar green corrosion. The tarnish had its own quality, like smoke sealed into its skin. The children, called by curiosity more than invitation, gathered in the doorway. Their eyes widened as the beam of the flashlight fell fully on the object. The boy asked if it might be a safe, something left behind by the original builders. The girl wondered aloud if it contained valuables, her imagination already leaping to coins, jewelry, or letters. Their father cautioned them not to speculate yet, but his own mind was just as restless. He had seen safes before, hidden compartments in old houses designed to store documents or money. This box was different. It had no handle, no keyhole, no hinges he could see. It was a container, but one that gave no suggestion of how it might be opened. He tugged at it carefully, bracing his boots against the kitchen subfloor. The box shifted reluctantly, heavy and unyielding, as though it resisted being moved. When it finally came free of the cavity with a scraping sound, he nearly lost his grip under its weight. Together with his son, he carried it to the dining table, setting it down with dull metallic thud that vibrated through the wood. Everyone instinctively stepped back, as though the object had claimed space for itself. Up close, the strangeness of its design became more apparent. Its seams were seamless, its corners sharp but not welded in any familiar fashion. The surface bore faint markings, almost like scratches at first glance, but the longer one stared, the more deliberate they appeared. Curves and straight lines repeated in patterns too precise to be accidental. Time had worn them shallow, yet under the lamplight they suggested symbols rather than damage. The father pressed his palm flat against the lid. The cold sank quickly into his skin, deeper than expected, making him withdraw as if burned. He exhaled slowly, shaken by the sensation. His wife suggested calling someone, perhaps the contractor or even the local police. Yet the words sounded uncertain even as she said them. Who would they call and what would they say? That the house had grown a secret box no blueprint accounted for? That it had waited silently behind brickwork for nearly a century, only to reveal itself during an ordinary renovation? No one spoke for a while. The children hovered near, their eyes fixed on the object, caught between excitement and fear. The mother finally broke the silence, her voice low, almost reverent. "Whatever it is," she said, "it was meant to stay hidden." The father nodded but kept staring, his curiosity locked against his caution. The blueprints had promised a house of straight lines and simple spaces. Yet here, on their dining table, was proof that not everything had been drawn. The box did not offer explanation. It sat heavy, tarnished, and impossibly cold, an artifact that belonged to neither past nor present, forcing them to confront the unsettling truth that their home had been guarding something unknown. And now that it had been pulled into the open, the silence of the house seemed changed, as if waiting to see what they would dare to do next. The box remained on the dining table for hours, its dull weight turning the room into something that felt less like a family home and more like a place of quiet reckoning. Meals were forgotten, the tools from the renovation left scattered across the kitchen floor. Everyone's attention returned, again and again, to the object that seemed so determined to defy explanation. The father turned it carefully under the light, his callous fingers tracing along the edges, searching for anything that resembled a seam, a hinge, a lock, some mechanism that would allow it to open. There was nothing. Each surface was uninterrupted, the corners sharp, the sides unyielding. It was a container that refused to admit it was one. The mother leaned closer, brushing away a thin film of plaster dust that had settled on its surface. Under the shifting lamplight, faint lines appeared, delicate etchings almost worn invisible by time. At first they looked like scratches, the kind any object might gather from years of neglect. But the longer she studied them, the less accidental they seemed. Curves intersected with straight lines, repeating at odd intervals, as though they once formed a larger pattern. When she pointed them out, the children crowded in to see, their breath fogging against the metal. The daughter remarked that it looked like someone had drawn on the box and then tried to erase it. The boy said it reminded him of maps he had seen in his school books, fragmentary but purposeful. The father fetched a magnifying glass from the drawer, one that had belonged to his own father, and held it over the surface. The etchings came into sharper relief. They weren't random scratches. They had been inscribed with precision. The grooves were shallow but deliberate, the kind made by someone who expected the work to last. Yet the patterns meant nothing to him. They were not letters, not numbers, not any symbols he recognized from architectural drawings or engineering. He felt an unease settle in his chest as he lowered the glass. This was not the work of a careless hand, and certainly not of anyone who had meant for it to be seen easily. When the contractor arrived the next morning to check on the progress of the renovation, he found the family gathered once again around the table. The father explained in measured tones what they had discovered behind the wall, gesturing to the box as though reluctant to touch it further. The contractor, a man who had spent decades working in Vermont's oldest houses, studied it with skepticism. He lifted it slightly, testing its weight, and frowned. The metal was unfamiliar, heavier than he expected, yet without the rust or corrosion that usually marked iron or steel of its age. He turned it slowly, running his thumb along the corners, before setting it down with a firm thud. "That doesn't belong to the house," he said finally, brushing his palms together as if to rid himself of it. "Not original. Not a thing any builder from this area would have used. I've opened walls in plenty of places, and what you usually find are tools, bottles, maybe a bit of money tucked away. But not this. Not sealed like this. The father pressed him for answers. If not part of the house, then where had it come from? Who would build an entire cavity into a kitchen wall just to conceal it? The contractor shook his head. He couldn't explain it. The construction of the cavity had been careful, deliberate, but it bore no resemblance to the shortcuts or repairs he typically saw. Whoever had placed the box there had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide it, bricking it in as though it were never meant to be touched again. The family exchanged uneasy glances. The children, still fascinated, asked when they could open it. The mother silenced them with a look, though she had no better answer. They all wanted to know, but the absence of hinges or locks made the object feel more impenetrable with every passing hour. It was not simply closed. It was sealed in a way that resisted even the idea of intrusion. The contractor suggested leaving it alone, perhaps call in an expert, a historian, maybe even law enforcement. He warned them that prying it open could be dangerous, though he admitted he had no specific reason for saying so beyond instinct. The father nodded, but he knew in his gut that no official would treat the box with the same strange reverence that now filled their house. It would be taken away, cataloged, reduced to evidence or artifact. Whatever it was meant to reveal, it would not reveal it to them. As evening fell, the box still sat where they had left it. Its faint etching seemed to shift under the changing light, sometimes sharp, sometimes barely visible, like a memory trying not to be forgotten. The family kept their distance now, speaking of ordinary things, but each pause in conversation drifted back to the same thought. The box did not belong, not to the house, not to the time they lived in, not to the plans they had for their future kitchen. And yet here it was, heavy and cold, as if waiting. The father leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the etchings that refused to resolve into meaning. For the first time since tearing down the wall, he wondered if discovering the box had been less a matter of chance and more a matter of inevitability. Some things, once hidden, seemed determined to be found. The dining room had never felt so heavy. The box sat squarely in the center of the oak table, its tarnished metal surface catching the glow of the overhead light in muted reflections. Around it, the family had arranged themselves almost unconsciously, each drawn close but not too close, as if the object exerted both attraction and repulsion at once. Dinner plates had been set aside, half cleared, the meal abandoned in favor of silence. The air seemed charged, carrying a weight that pressed down on the room until every small sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of floorboards as the house settled, felt amplified. The father leaned back in his chair, arms folded, eyes fixed on the box as though he could force it to reveal itself by sheer concentration. His mind worked in loops, cycling between the practical and the irrational. He tried to frame it as a problem of construction, a question of engineering. Who had placed it there? Why build a cavity into a wall for something with no lock, no hinges, no accessible function? Yet with each unanswered question, unease seeped in, tugging at him with a quieter, more insistent thought. Perhaps it wasn't meant to be open at all. The children sat across from him, each processing the object in their own way. The boy was restless, his fingers drumming lightly on the table, until the mother gave him a look that stilled his hands. His curiosity burned in plain view, the need to solve puzzles, to understand the unknown. To him, the box was a challenge, something to be figured out, and he had already begun imagining tools, methods, approaches. The girl was quieter, sketchbook open on her lap, pencil tracing light strokes as her eyes moved from the etchings on the box to the paper. She captured not the box itself, but the way the light fell against its surface, the suggestion of patterns that seemed half-hidden. For her, it was not a puzzle, but a story, one she sensed had been waiting longer than any of them had lived. The mother remained the most distant, though her gaze rarely left the object. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. But when she finally spoke, her words slipped into the silence like stones dropped into still water. She recalled her grandmother's voice, soft and deliberate, telling stories long ago of things that were buried not for safekeeping, but for warning. If you ever find something hidden where it doesn't belong, her grandmother had said, ask yourself why someone wanted it forgotten. The memory unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She could still picture the old woman's lined face lit by lamplight, speaking with the certainty of someone who had lived through more than she cared to explain. Those stories had always been dismissed as superstition, relics of an older generation. But now, staring at the box that radiated cold even in a warm room, she felt the edge of those warnings cut closer than she expected. The silence thickened as night deepened outside. The windows reflected only their own faces, faint and uncertain, gathered around the object that had disrupted the rhythm of their lives. Each time one of them shifted in her chair, the box seemed to anchor itself more firmly, as though reminding them that it was not going anywhere. The father finally reached out, his palm hovering inches above the surface before settling gently against the metal. He flinched at the chill, a sharp cold that seeped instantly into his skin, and pulled his hand back. He said nothing, but the children exchanged glances, their eyes widening at the confirmation of what they had already suspected. The box was not like anything ordinary. The boy asked cautiously if they should open it. His voice, though soft, broke the room's fragile equilibrium. The father exhaled heavily, shaking his head. "Not yet," he said, though his tone suggested less decision than hesitation. The girl stopped sketching, closing her notebook as though preserving the moment for later. She whispered that maybe the box was waiting for something, though she could not say what. The mother stood, clearing plates with motions too brisk, as though reclaiming the room from the weight that had settled over it. But when she placed a hand on the back of her chair, she did not move to leave. She remained with them, unwilling to break the circle. Her grandmother's words still echoed in her mind, things buried for a reason. She wondered if opening it would free something that should remain bound, or if leaving it sealed would invite regret. No decision was made that night. The family dispersed reluctantly, drifting toward their rooms with backward glances, leaving the box where it sat, alone in the dining room. It seemed larger than before, its etchings faintly catching the lamplight. The father lingered last, his hand resting on the doorway as he studied the object. He had lived in the house long enough to think he knew every board and beam, every draft and creak. Now he realized he had only known the surface. Beneath it, hidden all along, something else had been waiting. The silence remained even as the lights were switched off and the house darkened, a silence that did not feel empty but watchful, as though the box itself carried a memory of being sealed away. And in that silence, each member of the family lay awake in their separate rooms, listening to the night, turning over in their minds the same unspoken question. What had they brought back into light, and why had it been hidden in the first place? The attic was a place the family rarely visited, a low-ceilinged space filled with the detritus of years. Cardboard boxes softened by damp air, forgotten furniture under dust sheets, and a narrow path of floorboards that creaked with every step. The daughter had climbed the pull-down ladder on a gray afternoon, sketchbook tucked under her arm, still thinking of the box downstairs. She had intended only to distract herself, to wander through the attic's clutter and sketch the shapes of trunks and rafters, but her eye caught on something different, a stack of papers pressed flat beneath a warped chest of drawers. She crouched low, tugging at the brittle edges until a bundle slid free, scattering dust into the sunlight slanting to the single, clouded window. The papers were tied with frayed twine, their surfaces yellowed and curling. As she carried them carefully toward the window, she saw the faded ink, handwriting slanted and elegant, the strokes of a time when letters were not dashed off quickly, but written with intention. The date on the first sheet read 1927. Her heart beat faster as she sat cross-legged on the wooden boards, spreading the letters in her lap. The first pages described routine matters, the cost of lumber, the hiring of masons, plans for a kitchen renovation not unlike the one her own family had begun. But as she read further, the tone shifted. The words grew more halting, the sentences interrupted by hesitation. The writer spoke of something discovered during construction, a detail glossed over at first, then described with unease. "We cannot proceed until the matter is addressed," one letter read. The workers refused to continue, claiming the burden laid within the walls is not for mortal hands to disturb. She frowned, reading the line again, her pencil tracing over the words as if that might make their meaning clearer. A burden laid within the walls. The phrase echoed too neatly, too perfectly, against the discovery of the box in their own kitchen. She turned the page quickly, eager for more clarity, But the next sheet only deepened the mystery. The writer, whose name was smudged by water stains, spoke of arguments with builders, of whispers in town that the house itself was cursed, and of nights when noises echoed to the foundation though the work had been halted. The girl's fingers trembled as she turned to the final letter. The ink here was darker, as though pressed harder into the page. The handwriting rushed. It began mid-thought, abandoning introductions or pleasantries. If anyone should find this, know that what lies hidden was placed with purpose. To tamper with it is to invite. And then it stopped. The sentence broke off in a jagged line, the ink trailing downward as though the pen had been yanked away. The rest of the page was blank. She sat frozen, the unfinished words burning into her mind. To invite what? She whispered it aloud, but the attic swallowed the sound. A chill settled over her, the kind that made the skin at the back of her neck prickle. She gathered the letters into a careful stack, bound them again with the frail twine, and held them tightly against her chest as though protecting them from the shadows. When she descended the ladder, the rest of the family was gathered in the living room, their conversations muted. The box still sat in the dining room, its presence seeping through the walls like a hum none of them could ignore. She placed the letters on the coffee table and explained what she had found. Her father leaned forward immediately, eyes narrowing as he scanned the faded handwriting. Her mother's face grew pale at the phrase, "burden laid within the walls." The boy, though curious, shifted uneasily, as though suddenly less eager to press for answers. They read the pages together, each drawing their own interpretation. The father wondered if the letters referred to the very box they now faced, sealed nearly a century ago during renovations much like their own. The mother saw confirmation of her grandmother's warnings, proof that others before them had recognized the danger of tampering with things meant to remain hidden. The children felt caught between fascination and dread, the mystery deepening with each incomplete line. The abrupt ending of the final letter left them all unsettled. The daughter's voice was quiet when she suggested the writer may have been interrupted, perhaps by something sudden, something that prevented the warning from ever being finished. Her words hung in the room, heavy as the silence that followed. No one knew what to say in response. That evening, the father spread the letters out across the dining table beside the box. The contrast was stark. Fragile paper beside unyielding metal. Words meant to warn beside silence that offered no explanation. The family sat together long after the sun had set, the letters in the box before them, neither revealing enough, both demanding attention. It was the daughter who finally closed her sketchbook over the last letter, pressing its unfinished sentence beneath her pencil drawings. She said what they were all thinking, but none wanted a voice. The house was speaking to them, not through voices in the air, but through the fragments left behind, whispers from the past that had waited in silence until someone dared to uncover them again. The morning light came thin and pale through the dining room curtains, catching the dull sheen of the box still resting on the table where no one had dared move it. The family had grown used to its presence in those few days, though not in a comforting way. It had settled into the rhythm of the house like a guest who would not leave, demanding attention even in silence. The father poured his coffee but did not drink, his gaze fixed on the tarnished surface, as if the object itself might change when he wasn't looking. The mother busied herself with chores, keeping her distance, though her movements were sharper than usual, her unease bleeding into every gesture. The daughter leafed through the letters she found in the attic, reading the same passages over and over, trying to coax meaning from words that had stopped mid-sentence nearly a century ago. It was the son who drew closer, restless energy driving him back to the table. He pulled the lamp from the corner and set it down beside the box, angling the light so that it glared against the metal. His eyes narrowed as he leaned close. What always appeared as scratches now caught the light differently. They were too precise, too uniform, to be the product of age or accident. He called his father over, pointing with a finger at the grooves. The father bent low, following the boy's tracing lines, and for the first time he saw what his son had been seeing. The scratches weren't random. They were symbols, shallowly cut into the box in deliberate repetition. Under the lamp's glow, curves and straight lines formed sequences. Some resembled crude stars, others arcs that intersected with sharp angles. At intervals, the patterns repeated, as if they had been laid out in a language none of them could understand. The boy, excited, ran to fetch the old photographs of the house that hung in a narrow hallway, black and white images taken decades earlier, showing the structure in its younger days. He spread them out beside the letters, pushing the coffee cups aside, and compared them to the etchings. It was the daughter who noticed it first. She pointed to one photo of the parlor, where a wooden beam stretched across the ceiling. Carved into it were small marks, barely visible in the faded image, but undeniably similar in form to the one scratched into the box. She flipped through more photographs, her hands shaking as she found another beam in the upstairs hallway and another in the attic rafters, each marked with subtle carvings that no one had paid attention to before. The symbols matched not perfectly, but closely enough to suggest intention. The mother set down her dish towel and came closer despite herself, peering at the photographs with furrowed brow. She remembered dusting those beams when they first moved in, never noticing more than the scars of old wood. Now she felt a chill run through her at the thought that the marks had been there all along, visible but invisible, waiting for someone to connect them to the objects sealed in their wall. The father frowned, pulling one of the photographs closer. If the carvings and the beams and the etchings on the box were connected, then the house itself was part of whatever this was. He tapped a finger against the image. The beam in the parlor, the rafter in the attic, both were structural, integral parts of the building. Someone marked this place deliberately, he said, his voice low, half to himself. Not decoration, not damage, a system. The son, energized by discovery, copied the symbols onto paper, sketching them in rows, lining up the patterns from the box with those from the photos. The repetition was undeniable. Some sequence linked them together, though he couldn't yet see the logic. Still, the sight of it made his stomach knot with both excitement and unease. It was like looking at a code he almost understood, just out of reach. The mother broke the silence with a voice that trembled more than she intended. She said it reminded her again of her grandmother's warnings, of things placed where they didn't belong. She asked if perhaps the beams had been carved as a kind of ward, a barrier, something meant to keep whatever was in the box contained. Her words drew another silence over the table, heavier than before. The daughter whispered that maybe the whole house had been built around it. The thought landed with a weight none of them could dismiss. The idea that the beams, the carvings, the very structure of the place had been designed in relation to the box made the walls around them feel closer, less like protection, and more like complicity. The father straightened slowly, his eyes on the tarnished surface where the lamp's light caught the etchings. He had thought at first that the box was separate, something hidden away within the walls of their ordinary home. Now it seemed possible that the house itself had been shaped to guard it, to hold it, to keep it where it would not be forgotten, but never easily reached. The boy looked at his sketches, the symbols lined up in rows, and said what none of them wanted to say. This was not a mistake of construction, not a quirk of old design. It was deliberate, and it meant that the box was not just something they had found. It was something that had been waiting for them all along. The decision to try opening the box did not come easily. For days it had remained on the dining table, an immovable presence that altered the rhythm of the household. Meals were eaten quickly, conversations trailed into silence, and every glance seemed to wander back toward the tarnished metal that refused to give up its secrets. At first the father resisted the idea of forcing it. He told himself they could wait, study the symbols more closely, perhaps consult someone who might recognize them. But waiting only deepened the tension, and the unease of not knowing began to outweigh caution. Finally, one evening, as the children watched with a mix of eagerness and dread, he carried the box into the garage and set it down on his workbench. The cold surface clanged heavily against the wood. He fetched a chisel and hammer, tools he had used countless times in his work, and studied the box for some weak point, some seam that might yield to pressure. There was none. Still, he positioned the chisel against one corner and struck firmly. The sound rang sharp, echoing through the garage, but when he lifted the tool away, the box showed no change. No dent, no scratch, nothing at all. He tried again, harder this time, the blow sending a vibration up his arm, but the result was the same. The chisel skated off as though the metal resisted contact itself. His son stepped forward, suggesting they try a saw. The father hesitated, but the boy was already bringing one from the shelf. Together they braced the box and set the teeth against its surface. The saw screeched in protest, sparks spitting faintly as the blade skipped along the metal. After several minutes they stopped, both of them breathing heavily, and inspected the surface. Not a single mark remained to show their effort. The blade, however, bore grooves where its teeth had worn unevenly, as though it had met something harder than it was ever meant to cut. The mother appeared in the doorway, arms folded tightly across her chest. She did not tell them to stop, but the look on her face carried the weight of disapproval. She reminded them of her grandmother's words, that things hidden were sometimes hidden for reasons better left untested. The father listened but turned back to the bench, unwilling to be deterred. If the box could not be cut or pried, perhaps heat would weaken it. He lit the old propane torch he used for soldering, the blue flame hissing as he applied it to one corner of the box. They watched in silence as the metal glowed faintly, then cooled again unaffected. The tarnish did not blister, the seams did not shift. It was as if the flame itself had never touched it. When at last he shut off the torch, the room was filled with silence thicker than before, broken only by the cooling tick of the metal frame of the workbench. The daughter, clutching her sketchbook, whispered that maybe it wasn't meant to be opened by force. Her words hung in the air, unchallenged, because each of them had already been thinking the same thing. That night, as they carried the box back into the house, a knock sounded at the front door. Their neighbor, an older man who had lived on the road for decades, stood on the porch with his cap in his hands. He had heard the noise from the garage, the hammering and the screech of metal, and asked if everything was all right. The father, uneasy, admitted they found something unusual in the wall during renovations. The neighbor's eyes narrowed at the sight of the box resting on the dining table behind them. "You ought to be careful with things like that," he said slowly, his voice carrying the cadence of someone repeating wisdom learned long ago. "Not everything sealed up is meant to be unsealed. My father used to say some containers are left closed by choice, and it's best not to question why." The mother stiffened at his words, her grandmother's warnings finding a mirror in his. The children leaned closer, curious, asking if he had ever seen anything like it. He shook his head. "No," he said, "but I've heard stories. Families in these parts have found things in old houses before. Letters, yes. Boxes, sometimes. Not all of them were glad they opened what they found." He did not elaborate, and when pressed, only repeated that silence often had its own purpose. He tipped his cap and left them standing in the doorway, the cool night air creeping into the room. After he had gone, the family gathered once more around the box, each unsettled in their own way. They had tried strength, heat, persistence, and the object had not yielded. It seemed to defy not only their tools but their will, absorbing every effort without reaction. It remained closed, unchanged, as though it had been designed to endure centuries without compromise. The father sat heavily in his chair, exhaustion pressing against him. For the first time, he wondered if the neighbor was right, if the attempt itself had been a mistake. The others said nothing, their eyes fixed on a metal surface that seemed impossibly more inscrutable than before. The house creaked in the quiet, and it felt to all of them as though the box had grown heavier, not in weight but in presence, a thing more immovable than ever. The knock on the door came just after noon, when the light slanted warmly through the farmhouse windows, and the box still sat like a patient intruder on the dining table. The father opened it to find a man in his late 60s, carrying a worn leather satchel and balancing wire-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose. He introduced himself as Dr. Alan Hargrove, a local historian who had heard through a neighbor that something unusual had been found in the old farmhouse. His voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to piecing together fragments of the past, and though the family hesitated, they eventually let him inside. The moment his eyes fell on the box, he stopped mid-step. He set his satchel down carefully on a chair and moved closer, circling it with deliberate patience, like one approaching a relic in a museum. His fingers hovered above the tarnished metal but did not touch. Instead, he leaned in to study the faint etchings, whispering softly under his breath as though reciting names from another time. When he finally spoke aloud, his tone carried both gravity and fascination. He explained that the farmhouse had once been property of Judge Elias Corbett, a man who had lived alone in the years leading up to the Great Depression, and who had disappeared without record sometime around 1931. The family exchanged glances, startled by the mention of a disappearance. They had known only that their house was old, its deeds passing through generations with little fanfare. But Hargrove's words gave shape to the silence that had always seemed to cling to the walls. He opened his satchel and retrieved a folder, sliding across the table faded newspaper clippings and photocopied documents. Headlines spoke of economic ruin, banks collapsing, and families losing their homes. Tucked among them was a short column about Corbett himself, local judge missing. Unexplained absence raises questions. It was no more than a few sentences, almost buried between larger stories. But the implication was clear. He had vanished, leaving unfinished business behind. Dr. Hargrove pointed to the article and then back at the box. He explained that Corbett had been a reclusive man, known for presiding over difficult cases involving property disputes, bankruptcies, and matters that often left bitterness in their wake. Rumors suggested he was in possession of sensitive documents, evidence, testimonies, even confessions that had never been made public. "If that's what's in there," the historian said, tapping the edge of the box with one knuckle, "then what you found is not just an heirloom. It's a fragment of unfinished affairs, sealed away when the man himself could not see them resolved." The mother shifted uncomfortably, recalling her grandmother's warnings, while the children leaned forward with renewed excitement. The father asked whether the historian believed the box could be opened, and if so, how? Hargrove shook his head slowly, explaining that artifacts like this often defied modern understanding. The metal, he suggested, might have been custom cast, its alloys unfamiliar, its construction intentionally secretive. He had seen strong boxes, lock boxes, even cryptic caskets in archives, but nothing precisely like this. The absence of hinges or keyholes made it less a container than a sealed vessel. Its very design suggested it was never meant for casual opening. For a moment, the room filled with silence as each of them considered the weight of his words. The daughter asked about the symbols etched faintly into the surface. Hargrove leaned closer, adjusting his glasses, and traced them lightly with his eyes. He admitted he recognized echoes of Masonic imagery, repeated patterns, geometric alignments, and sequences that hinted at ritual meaning. Corbett, he explained, had been rumored to associate with fraternal lodges and secret societies common in New England at the time. If true, then the box might not simply contain legal papers, but something tied to networks of influence that thrived in secrecy. The idea unsettled the father, though he tried not to show it. He asked bluntly whether the box might contain something dangerous. Hargrove did not dismiss the question. He said only that the past had ways of pressing its weight onto the present, and that sometimes what was hidden to protect others as much as to protect itself. His advice was cautious. Consult further records, study the history of Corbett's cases, and tread carefully before deciding whether to persist in opening what the judge had left behind. The historian gathered his papers and left them with the family, promising to return after consulting additional archives in the town hall and university collections. As he departed, his words lingered. Whatever is sealed in there is tied to a man who vanished without farewell. Objects like these carry stories that don't always end where you expect them to. When the door closed behind him, the family stood together, staring once more at the box on the table. It looked no different than before, yet the silence it projected now carried a name, a time, a mystery rooted in their own walls. It no longer felt like an anonymous discovery. It felt like a message suspended from another life, one that had waited nearly a century for their eyes to fall upon it. And for the first time, they began to sense that their home was not just theirs, but a stage where forgotten history was quietly demanding to be seen again. The father sat in the county records office, a dimly lit room that smelled faintly of dust and mildew, the air thick with the weight of old paper. Before him lay stacks of bound ledgers and brittle folders, each one a fragment of the town's architectural history. He had requested the farmhouse's records again, insisting that something didn't add up. The clerk, distracted and mildly irritated by his persistence, had rolled out the appropriate volumes with little ceremony. Now, with a pencil tucked behind his ear, he spread the pages across the table, determined to see what he might have missed the first time. At first, everything appeared routine: plots, property transfers, notations about minor renovations spanning decades. The farmhouse had passed through quiet hands, bought and sold without much incident. But when he reached the section concerning the original build, he stopped. The blueprint registry for the house was inconsistent. Some sheets were yellowed originals, carefully inked and precise, while others seemed too neat, almost staged. It was only when he lifted one page to the light that he noticed the difference. The texture was wrong. Unlike the older pages, brittle with age, these were replacements smooth and faintly glossy. They bore the shape of drafts, but not the rigor of true architectural work. Lines wandered, measurements didn't align. Most unsettling was the absence of the foundation plan. Where he expected to see cross-sections of stone, footings, and walls, there was only a vague sketch, little more than a rectangle with numbers scrawled around its perimeter. It looked less like a professional drawing and more like a hurried attempt to fill in space. Flipping back and forth through the registry, he realized entire pages had been removed. The stubs of paper left behind suggested deliberate tearing, not clerical error. He felt his pulse quicken as he ran his fingers along the edges, tracing the evidence of absence. Whoever had handled these records had not wanted anyone to see what was once there. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his forehead, thinking of the box resting on their dining table miles away. The connection was unmistakable. The missing blueprints were not an accident. They were tied to the very place where the box had been hidden, as though someone had ensured no official record would survive to reveal its existence. The clerk wandered by, glancing briefly at his spread of documents, and asked if he was finding what he needed. The father pressed, asking whether records were often tampered with. The clerk frowned, saying it was unusual but not unheard of during Depression years. Some families, desperate to hide debts or disputes, might have interfered with official documentation. Yet even he admitted this level of removal was extreme. He suggested checking archive microfilm, though warned that many reels had been damaged or misplaced decades earlier. The father nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. He imagined Judge Corbett sitting in a similar chair, carefully removing the pages, replacing them with weak imitations. Was he concealing the existence of the hidden chamber? Was the foundation drawn to mislead others? The thought unsettled him. The secrecy of it, the deliberate erasure of truth. As he turned to the microfilm cabinet, he felt a creeping unease. The reels rattled softly as he pulled them out, one by one, searching for the farmhouse's lot number. Finally, he slid a reel into the reader and cranked the wheel slowly. The machine flickered to life, projecting faint images onto the dusty glass screen. There, grainy and imperfect, he found fragments of the missing pages. They were incomplete, edges cut off, but enough remained to show careful renderings of a foundation wall thicker than typical builds. And in the corner, a faint annotation, barely legible but visible, stated, "Sealed cavity east wall." His breath caught. It was proof that the house's foundation had been built to conceal something intentionally. Proof that the missing records weren't simply lost to time, but removed with purpose. He copied the image down, though his hand trembled slightly as he traced the letters. The reel skipped forward, the rest of the page dissolving into shadow. But it didn't matter. He had seen enough to confirm what he already feared. Packing up his notes, he left the office quietly, though the weight of what he carried was heavier than the satchel on his shoulder. The late afternoon sun spilled across the courthouse steps, but its warmth did not reach him. Instead, he felt chilled by the idea that his family's discovery was part of something larger, a design written into the very bones of their home. As he drove back, the winding road seemed longer, the trees leaning inward as though listening. He thought of his wife's unease, her grandmother's warnings, his children's curiosity, the historian's solemn caution. The box was not just an object buried in secrecy. It was a reason their house was built the way it was, the reason records had been stripped from history. When he stepped back inside the farmhouse and saw the box waiting in the same place, silent and unyielding, he understood what had unsettled him most at the county office. The phrase in the blueprint did not say hidden chamber or storage. It had said sealed cavity, not built for access, built to remain closed. And whatever rested within had been meant to endure not days or years, but lifetimes. The first whispers began at the hardware store, carried on the low voices of men who claimed to have heard it from someone close to the renovations. By the end of the week, what had started as rumor hardened into gossip, and by the time Sunday came, nearly everyone in town seemed to know that the family's old farmhouse had yielded something strange in its walls. The family hadn't told anyone directly. They had been careful, keeping the box within the house, avoiding unnecessary mention of it outside their home. But secrecy in a town of this size was fragile. It was enough that a contractor spoke too freely at the diner, enough that the historian's curiosity was noticed, enough that eyes lingered a little longer on the family when they walked through town. At first, it was only the sidelong glances, the curious questions disguised as neighborly interest. But soon came a knock at the door, a man in a tailored suit introducing himself not as a neighbor, but as a representative of a regional development company. His words were polite, rehearsed, delivered with the calm efficiency of someone who had given the same speech many times before. He said his firm specialized in acquiring properties with historical or structural significance, and that they had taken particular interest in the farmhouse. His offer came swiftly, a purchase price nearly double what the house might reasonably fetch on the market. The family exchanged confused glances, their surprise obvious even to the man making the pitch. The father asked why a development company would want an aging farmhouse on the outskirts of town, a structure in need of endless repair. The man's smile did not falter. He spoke of preservation, of potential restoration into a landmark, of projects funded by generous backers. Yet his words fell hollow, as though they were meant to fill space rather than explain. When pressed for details, his answers thinned further. He promised documentation, follow-up meetings, a chance for the family to consider the proposal. But the eagerness in his tone betrayed the urgency. This was no casual inquiry. It was pursuit. After he left, leaving behind a crisp business card embossed with a logo none of them recognized, the family sat in silence. The box remained on the table between them, though no one spoke its name aloud. The connection was too clear to ignore. The sudden interest in their house, the excessive offer, the vagueness of purpose. None of it made sense without the box at the center. They began to suspect that whatever was inside had a value beyond their understanding. Something worth not just money but intervention. Days later, a second letter arrived in the mail, formal and legalistic. It reiterated the company's interest, this time with numbers in black ink, a figure so high it almost unsettled them to read. The mother placed the letter down with a kind of unease, as though even holding it carried weight. The children sensed it too, their conversations quieter, their questions sharper. What was it about their farmhouse that drew strangers to their door? The father resolved to dig deeper. Looking into the company that had approached them, what he found was little more than shadows, a chain of offices incorporated under different names, addresses that led to empty buildings, phone numbers that rang endlessly. There was no visible presence in Vermont, no project the company had claimed publicly. It was as if the entity existed only on paper, a mask for something else. He returned from the library with more questions and answers, his brows knit tightly as he stared again at the box on the table. Meanwhile, the town's curiosity grew bolder. Neighbors dropped by unannounced, pretending at kindness but prying with their eyes. The family could feel the atmosphere shifting, their once quiet farmhouse now transformed into the center of quiet speculation. They caught sight of unfamiliar vehicles slowing as they passed the house, faces lingering just long enough to be noticed. On more than one night, the dog barked at movement near the edge of the property, though when they looked out, no one was there. The mother's unease grew steadily, recalling her grandmother's warning that things buried were often buried for a reason. To her, the box had already disrupted the balance of their lives, drawing in forces from outside their walls. She spoke of leaving it alone, of resealing in the foundation, and moving forward as though it had never been found. But the father was not so easily convinced. His curiosity had hardened into something sharper, mixed with defiance. Whoever wanted the box had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden, and now to reclaim it. That, to him, meant there was more at stake than just the contents of a sealed container. The children, caught between their parents' tension, whispered late into the night about the possibilities. Treasure secrets, crimes long hidden. They let their imaginations run wild, though beneath their wonder was the same fear that gripped their parents. The house no longer felt like their own. Its walls seemed thinner, its windows more exposed. The box had not been opened, yet already it had altered their lives. As another week closed, another letter arrived, this one less formal, more direct, urging them to accept before the window of opportunity closed. The family gathered again, the unopened box silent before them, and felt the pressure mounting from all sides. They had not chosen to discover it, but discovery had chosen them, and now it seemed the outside world was prepared to claim it, no matter the cost. The farmhouse had always spoken in its own way, settling beams, sighing floors, the occasional rattle of wind through the chimney. But on this night, the sounds were different. They carried an edge that was not natural, a pattern that was not random. The family gathered in the living room, though none of them admitted outright why. Each claimed fatigue or restlessness, yet their eyes drifted toward the kitchen more often than not. With a box sat untouched on the table, its dull surface catching what little light filtered in from the hall. The first noise came just after dusk, when the youngest child, half dozing on the couch, sat upright at the sound of a low thud from the kitchen. The father rose to check, expecting perhaps the dog or a shifting chair. But when he entered, everything remained in place. The box was there, square and unmoved, yet the air around it felt charged. He lingered, staring, before forcing himself back to the others. He said nothing of what he felt, though the unease followed him like a shadow. As the evening deepened, the sounds grew stranger. Floorboards creaked in measured steps rather than scattered groans, as though someone unseen was moving through the hallways. A faint vibration came through the walls, almost too subtle to notice, like the hum of wires in an old transformer. Yet no machinery in the house could account for it. The mother tried to convince herself it was the plumbing, the heating system, the ordinary life of an aging structure. But as she pressed her palm to the wall near the kitchen door, the hum seemed to meet her hand, a pulse that was faint but steady. It was the youngest, a girl of only 8, who spoke the words the others were thinking but dared not give voice to. She said she heard whispers when she tried to sleep, not words she understood, but sound that slid together in strange rhythms. The family hushed her, half afraid to encourage her imagination, half afraid it was not imagination at all. But the girl's eyes were wide with sincerity, and when she pressed her small hands over her ears, she insisted the whispers found their way through regardless. The son, older and less easily swayed, scoffed at first. He suggested the noises were mice in the walls, wind in the eaves. Yet Evie began to shift uncomfortably when the dining room chair moved ever so slightly on its own, scraping across the floor with sharpness that cut through the hum. All of them froze, watching the empty chair as if it might reveal what had pushed it. The father rushed in again, lifting it, inspecting the floor beneath, but no slope or draft could explain it. Time passed sluggishly that night. Every sound seemed amplified, every silence heavier. They tried to distract themselves with conversation, with the noise of the television, but nothing held. Their attention was magnetized toward the kitchen, drawn as though by some silent command. The box did not glow, did not move, did not open, and yet its presence consumed the air. It seemed larger than its actual size, as if the very walls had bent to accommodate its weight. At midnight, when the house finally quieted, the mother rose to check the doors and windows. She found them locked, the curtains drawn, yet the sense of being watched pressing on her shoulders. She lingered at the threshold of the kitchen, her gaze caught by the faintest shimmer on the box's surface. Not light exactly, not reflection, but the illusion of movement, shapes swimming just beneath the tarnished metal as though the box itself were breathing. She stepped back quickly, heart pounding, unwilling to step closer. Upstairs, the youngest child stirred in her bed, caught between waking and dreaming. In her half-sleep, she saw faces she did not know, their mouths moving in rhythm with the whispers. They were not frightening in appearance, but their eyes bore into her as though demanding she understand. She woke with tears on her cheeks, the voices still echoing faintly in her ears. She padded down the stairs in silence, clutching her blanket, only to find her family gathered still in the living room, waiting as though sleep had been banished from them all. The father, weary but firm, suggested moving the box out of the house entirely, placing it in the shed or burying it again in the earth. Yet no one stood to help him. The thought of touching it, of shifting its place even a little, carried its own dread. They had brought it into the open, and now it seemed the box had claimed its place among them. The idea of moving it felt not like relief, but provocation. The night dragged until dawn, the windows slowly paling with the first hint of morning. The sounds quieted then, the hum fading until only the ordinary creaks of the house remained. Still, no one spoke of rest. They sat together, the family drawn close not by comfort, but by the shared acknowledgement that something unseen now lived in their home. The box remained sealed, but it no longer felt inert. It was waiting, and so were they. The afternoon had been quiet, the kind of heavy silence that follows a sleepless night. The box still dominated the dining table, its dull sheen catching bits of daylight through the lace curtains. The family had grown accustomed to circling it, studying it, and yet keeping their distance as though proximity itself might rouse whatever lay dormant within. The daughter, restless and unwilling to endure another hour of simply staring, had taken it upon herself to trace the faint etchings carved into its metal skin. With a sketchbook at her side, she leaned over the box, carefully following the grooves with her pencil, trying to make sense of the patterns that seemed both random and deliberate. Her movements were delicate, more an act of reverence than analysis. Each line she copied revealed connections she hadn't noticed before, shapes that echoed the designs carved into beams in the attic. She pressed more firmly as she tried to capture the faintest of curves, her pencil sliding into a groove slightly deeper than the rest. There was a sudden resistance, a faint vibration beneath her hand, and then a sound sharp and unsettling, a crack that seemed far too loud for such a small action. The family jolted upright at the noise, their eyes darting to the box as if it had roared. The daughter froze, pencil still caught in the groove, her breath shallow. A jagged line had appeared across the box's surface, running with impossible precision, as though the metal itself had been waiting for the right touch. The sound deepened, like stone splitting under immense pressure, until with a slow, deliberate motion the box parted down the center. They all stepped back at once, the scrape of chairs loud against the floor. The son muttered a curse under his breath, while the mother clutched her arms tightly, her knuckles white. The father, though pale, stepped forward, unable to stop himself from peering into the narrow opening now visible. For the first time since its discovery, the box had revealed that it was not solid, not unbreakable. It had been sealed, locked in a way that no saw or chisel could undo, awaiting a gesture that was as much ritual as accident. As the crack widened, the air shifted. A faint, dry odor wafted out, not the stench of decay, but the musty scent of papers long hidden from air and light. The box, now gaping slightly open, exposed not treasures of glittering wealth, but the pale outline of bundled shapes, neatly arranged and carefully preserved. Cloth wrappings, tied with twine darkened by age, filled the interior in precise order. The son leaned closer, whispering that he had expected coins, jewels, something of obvious value. Instead, he saw packages that looked more like archives and riches. The daughter, still shaken, whispered that perhaps this was treasure of another kind, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. The father reached in first, his hands hesitant as though afraid of breaking the order within. He lifted one bundle and laid it gently on the table. The cloth felt brittle under his fingers, frayed at the edges but still intact. He untied the twine with careful movements, revealing layers of parchment folded tightly together. The ink, though faded, was legible. Names, dates, signatures, the markings of legal documents, ledgers, correspondence. The writing bore the formality of an earlier era, each line deliberate, each word preserved in the hand of someone who had meant for these papers to endure. The historian's words from the earlier visit now echoed in their minds. The house once belonging to a reclusive judge, a man who had vanished in the turbulence of the Great Depression. Perhaps these were his unfinished affairs, not fortune in gold, but a record of something far more complex. The mother, leaning close, pointed out that some of the papers bore seals embossed in wax, government insignias that had long since disappeared from circulation. Others carried personal letters, the handwriting urgent, sometimes erratic. There were names they recognized from local history, figures who had shaped the town, yet were spoken of only in fragments now. Each page pulled them deeper into questions they had not thought to ask. The youngest child, watching silently from her chair, whispered again in whispers, saying the box had been waiting for someone to listen. The family looked at her uneasily, each of them unwilling to dismiss her words after the night they had endured. They continued lifting bundle after bundle, laying them out in a growing spread across the table. It was not gold, but it glittered all the same, truths sealed away for nearly a century, carefully hidden where no blueprint would reveal them. The daughter, recovering her composure, realized that her accidental gesture had broken more than a seal of metal. It had opened the first door into the life of someone who had lived in the same rooms they now occupied, whose secrets had remained buried within these walls while generations passed above them. No one spoke of riches anymore. The question had shifted entirely. What story had been buried, and why had it been hidden so deliberately? As they leaned over the brittle papers, the weight of the discovery pressed on them all. They knew the box had not been meant to remain sealed forever, yet what it contained felt like a responsibility as much as a revelation. And somewhere beyond the silence of the papers lingered the unease that the judge's unfinished affairs were not just historical curiosities. They were threads left loose, waiting for someone to pull them into the present. The table was no longer a place for meals. Every inch of it was consumed by parchment and cracked leather journals, their pages breathing the dust of nearly a century into the air. The family leaned over the spread, hands careful, eyes wide, speaking little as the contents of the box revealed themselves in fragments of sentences, half-faded signatures, and lists that carried a weight heavier than any gold could have. The father lifted one of the journals, its spine stiff, the leather brittle, and opened it with the gentleness of someone aware that one wrong movement might cause the past itself to crumble in his hands. The ink inside was sharp despite the years, written and precise, angular hand of a man accustomed to formality and order. The first entries were deceptively mundane, detailing property disputes, court cases, and minutes of town meetings. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted. The writing became terse, urgent, almost frantic in places. Meetings were listed in coded phrases, initials standing in for names, locations reduced to symbols. A circle meant the courthouse. A triangle marked the Masonic Hall. An X denoted gatherings in private homes, always at night. Alongside these symbols were notes describing conversations that sounded less like judicial procedure and more like conspiratorial planning. The mother traced her finger over a line where the judge had written of engineered scarcity. He described how men with power had manipulated supply chains, hoarded goods, and waited until desperation spread before selling back to the public at prices that crushed families. Grain was locked in silos while children went hungry. Timber withheld while homes rotted in disrepair. In his careful script, the judge had recorded names of those involved, some familiar to the family even now. Streets in their town bore those surnames. Buildings carried their legacies in marble plaques. The revelation left a cold silence hanging over them, as if history itself had been stripped of its illusions. The son uncovered a letter folded tightly between journal pages. It was addressed not to anyone specific, but signed with initials that matched one of the judge's closest associates. The letter spoke of a plan to orchestrate a bank run, to trigger fear that would topple smaller institutions and allow larger investors to sweep in and acquire assets for pennies. The writing was clinical, detached, and yet beneath it was the undeniable awareness that lives would be shattered by the scheme. The daughter discovered another set of documents, ledgers filled with columns of numbers. Transactions shifted hands in complex patterns, but the underlying story was clear. Profit born from collapse. Each disaster, each downturn, was mapped in advance, anticipated and exploited. The judge's notes, squeezed into margins and scribbled in between rows, were filled with disbelief and anger. He had known he was recording evidence of deliberate ruin, but whether his intention was to expose it or simply preserve the truth for some later reckoning, no one could yet tell. As they pieced the fragments together, the story became darker. Journal entries described whispered warnings from men who had grown suspicious of the judge's scrutiny. One line stood out, written hastily, the ink smudged as though the pen had been lifted in panic. "They know I keep record. Time runs short." The family read it aloud, their voices subdued, each of them feeling the weight of the man's fear pressing forward through the decades. The youngest child, listening quietly from her chair, asked why someone would write all this down if it was so dangerous. The father, after a long pause, answered that maybe the judge believed someone someday would need to know. It was not wealth he had hidden, but truth, damning and volatile, locked away in a place where it might survive even if he did not. The mother opened another leather-bound book, this one filled almost entirely with letters. They were less formal than the journals, written in uneven hand, sometimes rushed, sometimes wavering. They spoke of threats, of men in the shadows who met in barns, cellars, and abandoned warehouses, sealing deals that thrived on collapse. The letters were never signed, only marked with the same initials that repeated across the records. One, written in January 1929, read like a warning. What comes will not be an accident. When the fall arrives, watch who stands tall amid the ruin. That is where the profit lies. The family exchanged glances, realizing these pages may have documented the very maneuvers that deepened the Depression itself, orchestrated not by chance but by calculation. The judge had been both a witness and an archivist, perhaps even a reluctant participant, recording not only what he saw but what he suspected, each line of thread pulled from a fabric most had accepted as natural disaster. By the time the lamps burned low that evening, the family was exhausted, their nerves raw. The papers remained scattered across the table, a silent testimony to a man who had seen too much and written it down. The box had not contained treasure as townspeople might imagine, but it had unearthed something far more perilous. Knowledge capable of reshaping how history was remembered. The family could not decide whether they felt fortunate or cursed to be its inheritors. The debate began quietly, almost cautiously, as though speaking too loudly might stir something they were not prepared to confront. The box sat in at the table, its contents spread across the wood in neat but fragile stacks. Journals with cracking leather, pages of ledgers, letters smudged by time, all of it carrying a weight heavier than anything they had ever handled before. The father broke the silence first. His hands rested flat on the table as he stared at the documents. He said that if they left these pages hidden, if they sealed them away again, they would be repeating the same crime as those who had profited from silence decades ago. History, he argued, was built on omissions like this, moments where ordinary people had chosen not to act. The mother's reply was immediate, her voice steady but tinged with something harder. Fear, perhaps, or the memory of her grandmother's warnings about things hidden for a reason. She reminded them of the visitors they had already attracted, the sudden interest from developers, the historian's curiosity, the whispers moving quickly through town. These pages did not belong only to the past. The names written here had descendants, families still thriving, some of them wielding power in the community. Exposing the truth, she warned, would not just change history. It would invite retaliation in the present. Secrets this dangerous did not lie dormant without cause. The daughter pushed back, her face pale in the dim kitchen light, but her voice sharp with conviction. She argued that if the judge had risked everything to record these truths, it was because he believed someone, someday, should uncover them. To keep them hidden now would be to betray his sacrifice. She spoke of her history classes in school, the lessons that painted economic collapse as an act of fate, the natural consequence of human error. But here in her hands was evidence of deliberate cruelty. To her, it was not just a family's choice. It was an obligation to the world. The son added his voice, though more uncertain. He asked what would happen if they brought the journals to the authorities. Would they be preserved and studied? Or would they be quietly confiscated, filed away in an archive no one would ever see? His words lingered, planting the thought that perhaps silence would not come from them, but from forces larger than they could resist. The youngest child listened and then spoke in her small, hesitant way. She said that the voices in the box, the judge's words, the warnings, the list of names, sounded lonely. They had been waiting to be heard. Her simple phrasing unsettled the others more than any reasoned argument. It made the documents feel alive, as if they had chosen this family at this moment to carry their message forward. The father, unsettled by his daughter's innocence yet emboldened by her clarity, argued more firmly. He reminded them of the night noises, the offers from outsiders, the shadows of interest already circling. Pretending ignorance would not protect them. They had already crossed a threshold by opening the box and reading its contents. To step back now would not erase what they knew. It would only leave them complicit in silence. The mother countered that history was filled with people who uncovered dangerous truths and paid the price for it. She asked what good would do to ruin their family in pursuit of exposing men long dead. Would justice really be served by dragging old sins into present? Or would it only ignite conflicts they could never hope to control? Her hands tightened on the edge of the table as she spoke, as if steadying herself against the pull of something vast and inevitable. The room fell into a long silence. The documents rustled faintly when a draft slipped in under the door, the sound eerily like a whisper urging them toward decision. Each family member sat with their thoughts, weighed down by the impossible balance of duty and fear. They knew that whichever path they chose, it would bind them not just for the present moment, but for years to come. The father finally said that truth was not theirs to hoard. If they hid it again, it would die in this house, and so would they, carrying the guilt of silence. The mother turned her face away, eyes fixed on the dark window, where their reflections hovered faintly against the glass. The children leaned closer to the table, their shoulders squared as though readying themselves for what would follow. No decision was spoken that night, but in the air between them, in the way their gazes lingered on the brittle ink of the judge's hand, something settled. They understood that silence was no longer an option, even if none of them yet had the courage to admit it aloud. The box had not merely been opened, it had chosen them, and in choosing, demanded something they could not return. The kitchen had been meant for change. Fresh paint, new cabinets, light pouring through widened windows, but it no longer felt like a place for renovation. The walls, once ordinary plaster and wood, seemed to lean inward with gravity of their own, as if the house itself had shifted to accommodate the burden now placed within it. The family stood together, each in their own silence, their gazes fixed on the table where the box lay open, its contents still spread across the surface. The journals looked fragile in the glow of the hanging lamp, but their presence filled the room with a weight far greater than the stacks of paper should allow. The father leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had thought he understood the value of history from years of reading and hearing stories passed down, but standing here, in the presence of words no one else had seen for nearly a century, he felt diminished. Knowledge like this was not abstract. It pressed on him with the heaviness of accountability. Each page represented men whose choices had shaped ruin, men who had lived and prospered by turning catastrophe into opportunity. He could almost hear their echoes, mocking from beyond the grave that their secrets had lasted this long. The mother sat in one of the dining chairs, her fingers tracing slow circles along the grain of the wood. She did not look at the papers directly, as though doing so might bind her to them more tightly. Her thoughts returned instead to her grandmother's warnings about what was left buried. She had dismissed those stories as folklore, fragments of superstition clinging to an older generation. Yet here in this kitchen, those words felt prophetic. She could not shake the thought that the house had guarded this secret deliberately, and by tearing down walls in pursuit of modern convenience, they had disturbed a balance that was never meant to be touched. The children hovered closest to the table. The daughter studied the journals with an intensity that made her seem older than she was. She had already pieced together more from the coded notes than the others, already glimpsed patterns in the transactions and connections in the names. For her, it was as if history had leapt from the dull pages of textbooks and taken flesh in the fragile leather before her. The past was no longer distant. It lived in her hands. The son's fascination was quieter, tinged with unease. He moved around the table, as though circling it might help him find an angle where the weight lessened. But there was no angle. Wherever he stood, the truth of the box followed him, persistent and unyielding. He could not escape the realization that their lives, so ordinary just days ago, had been altered in ways they could not undo. The youngest child leaned against her mother, her eyes wide, still half lost in the strange dreams she confessed in the night since the box appeared. She said nothing, but her small hand tapped absently against the table's edge, a rhythm that matched the hum they had all heard one uneasy night when the house itself had seemed to stir. No one mentioned it aloud, but each of them felt it, the sense that something had awakened. The room itself seemed to have grown older, its corners darker, its silence thicker. The blueprint of their lives had been redrawn without warning, and they knew it. They had begun with hammers and plaster, expecting to find only dust and beams. What they had uncovered instead was a truth heavy enough to change the way they looked at their home, their town, and themselves. The father finally broke the silence, though his words were not a decision, not a declaration, but a quiet acknowledgement. He said the house would never again be only theirs. Its walls, its history had claimed them. The mother closed her eyes, and though she did not answer, her hand reached across the table to rest gently on the journals. Her touch was careful, reverent, as though she feared the pages might crumble into ash. They remained gathered there, not moving, not speaking, bound by the weight of discovery. The kitchen they had planned to brighten and modernize had become a chamber of history, a place where memory lingered in shadows and ink. The tools of renovation sat idle in the corner, forgotten. What was meant to be a fresh start now felt like an inheritance too vast a measure. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, indifferent. Inside, the family stood in a silence that felt older than the house itself. The box and its contents waited on the table, patient, unyielding, carrying with them a reminder that not all discoveries bring freedom. Some deliver burdens disguised as knowledge, truths that alter the shape of everything they touch. The family understood, even without speaking, that they could not unearth such knowledge and remain unchanged. The kitchen was no longer just a room in a farmhouse. It was a threshold, and they stood upon it, aware that whatever future lay ahead would carry the shadow of what they had found. The greatest treasure hidden in their walls was not wealth or gold, but the terrible, undeniable knowledge that silence had preserved. And now that silence was theirs to carry.